Hey everyone in the VC, it's Matt, and I'm back with another. I did a George review yesterday, and now it's time to move on to the important one, the one everyone's been waiting for. Now it's time to review every Ringo Starr album ever made, which I'm not sure anyone's ever done. I'm not sure why anyone ever would, maybe, but we'll see, we'll see. So, Beatles break up, and I don't really remember it because I was about 6 at the time. But I don't know what the feeling was among people. If people thought that, give it a year or two and they'll get back together or whatever. And even if they didn't, I think people probably figured at the very get go when the breakup happened that John and Paul will be fine. George ought to do okay. People probably wondered what in the world's going to become of Ringo now. Is he just going to drum on John's album and then Paul's solo album and then George's, or is he going to go join another group or whatever? Because he really hadn't been known for writing songs or anything. He only had 4 writing credits in the Beatles, I think, and vocally, he has his moments, had his moments in the Beatles, but certainly not not on par with John and Paul or George vocally. So everybody probably wondered what Ringo was going to do after the Beatles. Ringo probably wondered what he was going to do. And his first step was this album, Sentimental Journey, which came out technically while the Beatles were still together. This came out before Let It Be was released. This was March 27th of 1970, and the Let It Be album came out in May that year. So it actually, chart-wise, did better than you'd expect, or better than I would expect it. It got to number 7 in England, and it got to number 22 in the United States. This is Ringo setting precedent, setting history, because it's an album of standards. He didn't write any of these. These are all old songs from, I guess, the 30s and the 40s, maybe a 50s song or two in there, I'm not sure. But maybe even earlier, some of this stuff might go back to the 20s or before. So these are favorite songs of his mom. His mom and other members of his family kind of helped pick out songs. And they're also songs that Ringo remembered because, he was born in 1940, so he was around pre-rock and roll, that he remembered from his youth, the music that his parents and aunts and uncles listened to and so forth when he was growing up. So I don't doubt that he also liked some of these songs too, as well as his parents and so forth. Um, Produced by George Martin. Each song's arranged by a different person. George Martin arranges one of them, but you got Paul McCartney, Quincy Jones, Maurice Gibb of the Bee Gees, Klaus Bormann, uh, John Dankworth, I don't know who that is, Elmer Bernstein, so there you go. And some other people here that arranged I don't know, there's about 11 songs on here, I believe. So a different arranger for each song, or 12 songs. So there you go. They recorded several old standards that didn't make the album, Autumn Leaves and so forth. Those show up on bootlegs here and there. 3 or 4 songs were recorded that didn't make the final album. This must have been, like I said, Ringo sets precedents because he's the first rock and roll star, as far as I know, to record an album of old standards. Even though certainly the Beatles had done songs, Honey Pie and When I'm 64 and so forth, that sort of harken back to the sound of the pre rock and roll music, the standards, the music hall, the big band. The Kinks, the song Winchester Cathedral by, I forget who did that, things like that. So this wasn't totally unheard of, but to do a whole album of this must have had people, first of all, they're thinking, what in the world's Ringo going to do? I would think, like I said, I was 6, I wasn't there, but I would think Beatle fans were wondering what was going to become of Ringo. And second of all, this album of standards in the age of 1970 with the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and Hendrix still around and hard rock and psychedelic rock, and here comes Ringo with an album of old songs from the 30s and 40s. Must have been a head scratcher to the general public, I would think. And I'm betting that the 7 in the UK and the 22 in the US are more just on the strength of the Beatles still being around and Ringo being a Beatle, and maybe idle curiosity on people's part to see what this was about, more than people really wanting to buying this album because they liked it. Ringo doesn't play on this; he just sings, and so yeah, get that in there. Um, Here's the album. I like the cover. This is a pub that's I don't know if it's still there or not now, but this is not too far from where Ringo grew up in Liverpool. Those are pictures of his family members in the window there. And then we got the back. There's the song list, and there's Ringo presenting his songs. So good stuff on the cover. I like the cover. And here is the just your standard Apple label there. So yeah, this is an album that I when I got into the Beatles 73 or so big time, and started buying Beatle albums, the solo albums as I could. Being a kid, not having the money, that was a slow process that took several years. And I eventually got around to having most of the solo albums up to, say, 1980 or so. There were several that I didn't get around to. This was one that I never bought back then. It was on my list to buy, but I had never heard it. I don't remember ever hearing this on the radio when I was a kid, even though I heard Ringo, you know, the hits, Photograph, and It Don't Come Easy and so forth on the radio back in the 70s. I don't recall ever hearing this played on the radio really until the Beatles channel, as far as I can recall. And I never heard this album until probably the 90s or so. I finally got around to get a copy of it, but it was on my list to buy just because I was a Beatle nut and a completist. But there was always something, a Rolling Stones album I didn't have yet, or a Who album, or another, you know, solo Paul or whatever. So it just is one of those that I'll get to it someday. Just going on the basis of not having heard it, but seeing it getting bad reviews in all the Beatle books that I read in the 70s and so forth. So when I finally did get it, it's all right, but we'll get into that in a minute. But again, like I said, sets precedent because later on this would become sort of like a little cottage industry, because years later, way past 1970, Linda Ronstadt, Rod Stewart, Paul McCartney, just what, about 8 years ago or so, did an album of standards. I think I've never heard it, but Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga did one. I think I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. I guess that was standards. I'm not sure. I heard they did a duet album or something. Sinatra, some of his last albums were duets with I don't know, Bono from U2 and other pop and rock and roll people. So I think Linda Ronstadt actually had, and Rod Stewart had some success doing this. But like I said, Ringo did it first, and did it at a time when it was unheard of, and probably very confusing to anyone who bought this expecting pop or rock and roll. But yeah, so he does overall pretty good voice on this. Ringo's voice, of course, you know, you got to, for Ringo, like I said, you're not going to get Paul McCartney, John Lennon, Otis Redding, Brian Wilson or anything, but he has his moments, and he seems to enjoy it himself here. So we'll just go through the song list. Side 1 begins with the title track, Sentimental Journey. A little slow-paced and languid. Just a little too slow. Nice singing voice, like I said. I give it a 5.5. And a lot of these songs I remember from being a kid because my parents listened to music like this, and my grandparents too. So when I was a kid, I thought this type of music was boring and corny. Later on in life, I grew to appreciate it somewhat, but having been, you know, always been a rock and roll and soul music guy, stuff like this, when I'm in the mood for it, which isn't very often, I enjoy it. When I'm not in the mood for it, I appreciate it, but don't really have the time for it. And I guess that's my overall take on this album. I don't play it very often. Sometimes I'm in the mood for it. When I do play it, when I am in the mood for it, I generally enjoy it. It's nothing great, but it's a nice start for Ringo, I guess, because he, just out of the gate, knowing that the Beatles were coming to an end, it's not like he was going to run out and write 12 songs to get an album together that quick. So this is a good way to sort of get him started on his solo career. He would go on to do better, obviously, but yeah, it's okay. So 5.5 for Sentimental Journey. Night and Day is this big brass production, like a Las Vegas show tune. Uh, I give it a 4. It's a little overdone for my tastes, and again, sounds like something my parents would have dug back in the 1950 or whatever. But it's nice, Just it's okay. I give it a 4. Whispering Grass. Now here we go. This is a lot better. This is a nice ballad, a nice swelling, cinematic, lush, big picture feel to it. I really do enjoy this song, and Ringo's in good voice here. I'm going to give that one an 8, one of my favorites on the albums. Bye Bye Blackbird, another song that I remember hearing when I was a kid. Never cared for the song, still don't, but it's upbeat, it's Johnny, good recording. Ringo seems to be having a lot of fun with his singing and performing it. So I'll give it a 6 based on Ringo's enthusiasm, even though it's not a song I ever really cared for. I'm a Fool to Care is the 5th song on side 1. It's kind of a nice ballad, like a strolling pace, mid-tempo ballad, but then it's got a rousing, jazzy instrumental breakdown kind of toward the end, which is a lot of fun. And yeah, another one that's up there. I like this one. It's number 8. By the way, if I didn't mention, there were no singles released from this album. So, and there's a couple of things that could have been a single. I don't know. His first single was Don't Come Easy, which is one of his best songs ever. And that was probably the way to go. But there's a few things here that might have got a little airplay if they'd been a single. And maybe Whispering Grass and I'm a Fool to Care would have been a good choice. Stardust, that's the one that Paul McCartney arranged. And it picks up a little toward the end of the song, but it's a pretty slow-paced and dull song, and not very good. I'm going to give that one a 3. So, and that's another old song. I remember my parents listening to stuff like that, but yeah, not a very good performance there. We go over to side 2. The first song is Blue Turning to Gray Over You, which kind of displays Ringo's limitations as a singer in parts, but I do like toward the end the like someone found some new thrills part. He kind of picks up on the vocal and good, so I'll give it a 4 based on that. It's another song that's just all right. Number 2, Love is a Many Splendored Thing. And it's funny because I remember this song. I don't know when it came out, but I think it was a hit in the mid-60s for somebody, and I can't remember who did it originally. But I remember us being little kids, just before I was even into the Beatles, and that would be on the radio, like the radio stations my mom and dad played. And I just remember my cousins and us making fun of that song and walking around singing it all dramatic, like when we were 3 or 4 or whatever. A really dumb, drippy song, and Ringo doesn't do much to rectify that in his cover version, so I'm going to give that a 3. Third song is Dream, which is pleasant and nice song in a good way. Ringo's voice is pretty good on this, but really the instrumentation and George Martin's production. George also arranges this song, so good song there. I give that a 7, which is a good pickup after the kind of silly, drippy Love is a Many Splendored Thing. Number 4 is You Always Hurt the One You Love. Musically, it's energetic. Vocally, it's just all right. Overall, it's just mid-level. I give it a 5. 5th song, Have I Told You Lately That I Love You? It's got a nice, this is really like this one. This is probably my favorite on the album. It's got a nice bass running through it. It's got almost an R, it's the old standard pop music feel, but also with hints of almost R&B at times. Sounds like the Bar-Kays or the Mar-Kays, the Stax Band. And good song. I'm going to give it a 8.7. So my favorite on the album, I think, I would say. And then, really, that should have closed the album with "Have I Told You Lately That I Love You?" because the one that does close the album is a snoozer. It's got these cloying backup female vocals in there that are just sort of sugary sweet and annoying. Ringo's vocals okay on it. The song is pretty lame into the album. I'm going to give that one a 3. So overall on this album, I think I'm going to go 6.5. It's like I said, it's you got to be in the mood for it. And I don't know who I'd really recommend this to. Hardcore Beatle fans that need everything, of course. If you're a fan of your parents' music, I mean, if you're my age, your parents' music. If you're younger, your grandparents' music and that stuff, you might enjoy this. Like I said, I appreciate it more than I really care about it. Occasionally, when I'm in the mood, I can enjoy that type of music, and but you might enjoy this if you're a big fan of that stuff. Then again, you might be better off just going off and listening to the old big band records and Perry Como and Sinatra and Bing Crosby records instead of Ringo's version take on it, I guess. And if you're a fan of these type of albums that were later done by Paul and Linda Ronstadt and Rod Stewart and all those guys and girls, you might enjoy this one, the kind of the one that set the standard for them, I guess, or at least was the first one out there. And so yeah, that's it. 6.5 for Ringo's debut. Nothing, not great, not bad. It's going to be an adventure going through Ringo's albums because it's a funny thing because everybody knows the hits of Photograph and Don't Come Easy and Oh My and all that, but most people pretty much outside of that don't pay much attention to Ringo. And there's a lot of dreck in the catalog, but there's also some good moments that didn't get the attention that they probably deserved. There's not going to be any Plastic Ono Band or Ram or great masterpieces here, but there is going to be some fun and some good music along the way, I think. We'll find out as we go through the catalog. And so yeah, Sentimental Journey, it's alright. It's pretty good when you're in the mood.